Hi, I'm Clytie, and welcome to the reflective presentation for Underflow. I'm finally done! This will be my reflective using Driscoll and Gibbs to properly analyze the past 6 months and how I worked during that time. Underflow is a 2D turn-based RPG where you can underflow your health to full, basically taking the turn-based combat of Earthbound but with a story more akin to comedies such as Hyakano or a Splatoon game. This game started as an idea last year, back in May of 2024, in which I was but a wee lass working on Scrapforge, a group project. During this period, I wasn't sure if I should go into the final project solo, but obviously I ended up going solo. The biggest component that convinced me to go solo was the last project I worked on, Poly, which is a Monopoly-style board game. It was among one of my favourite projects to work on, and it gave me the confidence that I could finish a pretty ambitious project solo. Alongside that, the reason for me wanting to work in monogame was influenced by my other favourite project, 15 Puzzles at Clytie's, which was the second project I worked on and yet one of the hardest to surpass in quality. So our first goal was to get through the prototyping phase, making a proof of concept for Underflow and seeing just how possible it would be to make this game. This first phase was to get the main gameplay mechanics down pat, working in Unity to see if this project would be possible at all, and playing around in monogame to understand what's required to make a game from scratch. This was an exercise in frustration, as I personally dislike prototyping quite a bit. Despite that, I was feeling hopeful that because things were going relatively well, that this project would end up working out. By the end of this process, I had what I thought was an idea of how long each part of the project would take, and on top of that, an idea of how much of the full game I could make realistically. Looking back on it now, with more foresight, I really should have focused more time on prototyping the battle system, so that later on I wouldn't end up having to cut it. It definitely felt right at the time, but clearly wasn't in the slightest. I'm not a person who likes working on prototypes. If the code fits, it sits, and while I am glad I did this prototyping process properly once, I really wouldn't want to do it again. Maybe it's a stubbornness thing, but the two things I felt I learned during the prototyping process was that the image class was the most important, and that I should be making a lot of classes for monogame and planning ahead. The most important thing, which was to properly learn that the battle system was too complicated early on, didn't happen. In large part due to the assumption that what I had already made was good enough test for that. A thing that can only be seen after having finished this project is that you should thoroughly test things when making a prototype. What I should have done is created a full battle start to finish that you could play through. The RPG elements are easy, they're the basic elements of any video game. But the battle system was extremely complicated and I needed to make sure in this prototyping process, which I didn't, that it was within the scope. So in future, if I ever go through this prototype process again, which I will almost certainly have to, I should, when prototyping, map out the full feature rather than a mostly conceptual version of the feature, and not just assume that because the base case worked, that the rest of the cases would also work. After making our prototypes, the first part of this project goes underway, the planning. Before anything can be coded, I needed to come up with a decent plan, so I tried to map out in my head and on a text file all of the classes I think would be needed and how they would connect to each other. This was a pretty easy process, if only because I missed about 20% of the classes I actually needed. Though, in the grand scheme of things, I like this a lot since it always gave me a checklist to look at whenever I aimlessly didn't know what to work on. It also just is a nice feeling being able to check something off of a long list. It feels like making progress. In terms of productivity, this was a massive reason the project got anywhere at all. I think for future long-term projects, making something like this would be really good because it was just that helpful to keeping myself motivated to keep going. Even on top of that, the checklist also stopped me from forgetting important things like keeping the code organized and using inheritance, two things I may be famously terrible at. This is a showcase of how just one minor change, in this case a list of class names with no particular direction, can immensely affect productivity. And this also comes as a part of the prototype that I wanted to highlight, since I wouldn't have had this without that phase of development. Prototyping is certainly helpful, it's just that when compared to how I normally develop things, it feels slow and it's hard to keep motivated through the slog. But once you reach the other side and can make a list like this, you go much faster. I'd like to see if I could add anything to this checklist that would make it even more productive. I know UML is supposedly very useful, I just have never learned how to use it. After I created the plan, I had to recode all of the foundational stuff and the essentials from my prototype. However, I had to make one crucial change which I think is worth talking about. I made XML from scratch. I coded XML from scratch for only one reason. I had no idea how XML actually worked. My prototype was coded following a tutorial from 11 years ago, and they use XML for all of the file loading. Now XML stands for Extensible Markup Language, and I can tell you how it worked in my prototype where it would fill all the classes with data when reading from a file at some point in between instantiation. However, should I have used XML for the final project, I would be more confused than this Arden not knowing when or even how it decides what to fill. Not only that, but it also doesn't allow for public variables that don't have XML ignore above them, which is just an extra annoyance. So I went with the option of coding my own solution, which works in a somewhat similar way, but a way that I control, meaning that I understand how it works explicitly because of the fact that I made it. It was also nice because I knew that whenever an error occurred in that area of the code, it was because I formatted the data incorrectly, which prevented lengthy searches throughout classes searching for one problem. Surprisingly, coding a simplified version of XML for this game was not that difficult, essentially just being a slightly complicated search function, and after I had made it, it was supremely useful. Not only was it intuitive because I made it, it also meant that I could run things through code if necessary without having to put in a file. Out of all of the decisions I made during this project, I feel this one was the smartest, as it removed one of the largest possible hurdles, which would be struggling with XML's strange system of filling classes before even instantiating them. Things I could improve with the system, or rather how I used it, was to keep a more consistent approach to each class's use of the system. For example, I really should have made all position variables use the same word or same word structure at least. I think that switching from XML to my own system was undeniably a good choice, and not only did doing so give me a better understanding of how markup languages work in general, developing the system meant that if I ever wanted to add saving, it was as simple as reversing the process, which I implemented, just never used. I think in the future I may use a similar system, but perhaps not use a markup language, as I feel that's not necessarily the most efficient way to store things for a video game. Either way, in the future I do want to add saving to some game at some point, even if it's just a simple school saving system. The foundation, the most important part of the game, because it's the thing that holds the entire game up. Each and every feature has to build upon a foundation, which requires essentially 3 things: the screens in Screen Manager, the images, and the maps. But that's 4 things. No, it isn't. Shut up, and I'm definitely not forgetting anything. Those are the only foundational elements, and there's nothing else major to think about, so stop asking. I also included a full screen mode, since that is also foundational, but it's also that antisocial rogue who sits in the corner and thinks it's better than everyone by not interacting. This part was a slog harder than receiving a phone call, but in comparison to the prototyping phase, which since you're going to throw out all that code and start again anyway, feels like 0 progress. Despite essentially just doing everything I've already done, but in my own way, it felt like a kind of zen activity, like decorating my shrine towards my hatred of Julian. Fuck you, Julian. Since I had already done all this before, I could turn my brain off and just make what is basically free progress, is what a brainless Mike Sakaka would think. I still needed to think, since I wasn't just copying the code from my prototype. The foundation is the least creatively intense portion of the coding process. You need to be very vigilant to make sure you don't trip yourself up in your own freshly cooked spaghetti. And anything you make needs to be tested to do exactly what it needs to do. You have little room for listening to the game because there's no one to listen to, and listening is for This isn't a digital circus. At this point I had to make everything right. As much time as that took, had I not done that, the latter half of the game would have taken significantly longer, though because I cut full screen later since it doesn't work, forget it exists and never talk about it again. Maybe I could have saved a week by just not worrying about it, but an important part is to learn from it, so it's not a big deal. Overall, the foundation was an instrumental part of getting this game finished at all, and while yes, I did forget a major foundational element of the game, no I didn't, and later had to cut that feature entirely because of it, no I didn't, I think the end result was overall improved by the things that did pan out. Next time, don't forget the battle system is a foundational element, you absolute dumb horse, but also just in general that reviewing everything one more time before starting the foundation may have helped you not make that mistake, so take advice from your high school maths teacher and recheck your work. Sorry, I don't know what came over me. Well, after the foundational stuff is the sub-foundational stuff, mainly text boxes and 9 slicing. Text boxes and 9 slicing are some of the most useful things available to people who make video games. Text boxes are pretty self-explanatory. Having an easy way to display text in an area for the player to see is really useful. I also made a font as part of this. 9 slicing is a similar issue where you want to cover an area with an image, but need that image to be resizable. It's useful in more things than just video games. These 2 things made for fun challenges. Text boxes are hard to do efficiently, and when you want to make said text boxes smart, you have to look in places other than my brain, which actually makes things much harder since you need to search for spaces and line breaks. 9 slicing was comparatively quite simple, and similarly very useful. You know, it's nice to talk about things that actually went into the final game. These sub-foundational elements, while comparatively easy to make, they also make up a vast majority of objects on the screen, and are almost as important as the image class itself. I would have put menus here alongside these, but I did cut menus, so they're clearly not as important. Get off your high horse, Mum said it's my turn on the high horse. This was the start of where coding becomes a little more creative. The foundation has been laid out, and so there's more room for creative solutions to problems, and since I'm coding things not in my prototypes, I don't already have the solution. This is maybe my favorite part of the process, though in future iterations I would like to add more detail to the fonts to allow for different size letters and such. This is the start of the ever-growing problem with a less detailed plan, easily getting lost in the weeds with something that, honestly, doesn't matter. While it's not the case yet, I have said that I cut menus later on, which is something that I spent a lot of time on. A big part of this whole system is that it is an interconnected network of problems. One tiny part is cascading effects on the rest of the game. Better planning would mean I wouldn't make things that end up getting cut in the end, but what can you do? Also, more specifically, I would love to make the 9 slicing more efficient and the fonts be more broad. Last is the battle system, the thing that got cut. Underflow, requiring a turn-based battle system to be Underflow, meant that I needed a battle system that was pretty robust. I wanted a move system to let enemies and the player have interchangeable moves. I needed items in inventory. I needed a health system that was unlike any other health system ever because it needed to handle both underflowing and regular damage, and a whole bunch more. I can admit that I was pretty overwhelmed with this system and not quite sure how to tackle it. I tried my best by tackling the health system first since that was the most unique, but a turn-based combat system is really complicated. It's clear, using the incredible magic of foresight, that this was going to be an insurmountable wall from the beginning. I had had some troubles getting the battle system to work in prototyping, and that should have been my clue that this was going to be difficult. It didn't help that I ignored/forgot about the problem until about 6 weeks in, and then had to scramble to figure out how a battle system works. Now, with what little I was able to get done, I learned a bit about what makes a turn-based battle system. One is the turn-based part, a simple and elegant way to go from the turn to the actions. Second is to separate moves from the players and enemies. You don't want to lock the player into only one move like a Kirby main in Smash. Creating a separate class and just calling it to affect the target or targets from an attacker should do. Third, and I think this is the most important part, start it at the start and don't wait 6 weeks to begin the most complicated part, you stupid parastratius for comioids. Ahem. Now, with that all said, it's quite obvious that I was going to need to do something about this. The game, at this point, still had plans for free-fall areas, and each area was going to have different enemies and NPCs and much more than I'm capable of doing. Something needs to change, and it needs to change now. So, with a heavy heart, I invoked the Wicked Avatar, and cut all of the battle system and the free areas as well as the story and the name of the game. Which at this point means that it was decided that I had to make this a new game. No, not that one. So instead of this being a relatively cool turn-based RPG, it's been turned into an arguably substantially relatively less cool walking simulator. The new plan is to have the character, who is now a slime because I don't have time for character designs, walk through variations of the same room. Call it an RPG, but the creator only had time for one room game. And since I like the meta angle, I would make every room being a commentary of a different project I made for university. I was honestly feeling quite stressed at this point because I had just cut the major mechanic and I was feeling really worried about whether or not this game would be anything. Sure, the game was pretty impressive in my opinion from a code standpoint since it was coded from scratch, but playing it, well, it's not much, is it? Thinking back, I think this was the best possible call. I had barely any time left when I decided to cut battles, and if I decided to just push through with all the might I had, I would have had a game that obviously wasn't finished. And between an unfinished game and a finished game, it's obvious which one is better. This felt like a textbook exercise in don't be precious with a video game. I had to remove the name of the game from the game, which is basically as awful of a thing to remove as any, but I'm glad that I did. Not glad that I had to, but glad that I did. The game now is relatively fun with dialogue and multiple rooms, which makes the game feel more full, so who am I kidding? I can't celebrate for this. All that work, all those ideas, all the energy required to make a spirit bomb, and it all comes down to this? I couldn't accept this. But what could I do? There's a little part of me that's stubborn enough to not want to take a hit lying down, a part so loud that it's the same thing that made me want to ignore the prompts of all the other games. What if I told you I'd been working on a little secret throughout this project, which if I implemented, would double the work I had to do in the art department? How would I do this? Well, it's actually surprisingly simple. I wouldn't be satisfied with just cutting content. I would add some of it back in. So are you ready? Let's do this. HD mode was a secret I wanted to add to the game since the very beginning, because of a piece of feedback I got about how the concept art looked. Each and every sprite gets an 8 times more detailed variant that mimics the style of my original concept art, allowing for the game to be played in both retro and modern styles, much like the re-releases of some older games such as Ace Attorney Investigations. This was a real feelings over function feature. There's no gameplay purpose for this feature, and I just wanted it because I thought it would be neat. In the end, I'm not entirely happy with how it came out, but I definitely think it was worth including, if only to satisfy myself. Despite making the code for the game slightly harder as it was planned from the start, it was pretty much implemented. All I needed to do was draw every single sprite a second time. Super easy, barely an inconvenience. This was the ultimate compromise. If I couldn't make the game I wanted to make, I would make the game the way I wanted to make it. And all in all, I'm happy this feature at least made it to the game. In the future, I do want the games I make to just have the time necessary to make them without worrying about deadlines, but of course that isn't realistic. And this was a good experience in how deadlines will affect how you work. For the next project I want to work on, my deadline is in about 12 years, so I hope I don't hit that one, but we'll see, won't we? For this section, we'll take it over to past clarity and just update the things that need updating. I started working alone. Being able to create games or art all by myself is fun, so I do it, and thus I have garnered the skills to work alone pretty much all the time. I'm extremely familiar with C#, it being a coding language I've likely spent over 5 years working in, and I'm very invested in this project. It's not like this is a game I've always wanted to make, but I have been holding on to this idea since last year, and as such do want to see this come to fruition no matter how that may come about. In terms of weaknesses, I get demotivated easily. It's a common joke with myself that I can always get halfway through a project but can never finish it, and while it has been proven untrue with most of the projects for this course, it's still a risk that I may get demotivated with the project halfway through. It's nice that I really didn't get too demotivated with this project. Sure, I had moments, and especially during the cutting of the name of the game, but all in all, this game really didn't have any demotivation issues. Also, I'm indecisive. That may not be as big a risk as it sounds, but as I've said before with my art, indecision has kept a lot of things from moving forward and may cause problems in the future should they continue. That being said, as I am focusing on code, it shouldn't be too big of an issue right now. I also juggle a lot of different projects. This could be considered a strength or weakness as a lot of projects require a lot of different skills, so I just consider it a break from the main project, but it still could wrap around to causing me to get demotivated for the actual central project if it goes too far, which means I should be careful. I did in fact juggle a few projects during the course of this one, so I would consider this checked. In terms of opportunities, an opportunity that I hadn't really considered is analyzing the code for Celeste, which was also made in Monogame, though it may be difficult. The Celeste idea ended up falling through when I couldn't find anything on it. I'm supremely terrible at Googling, so it ended up just not working out. Another would be to look at Tiled and how it functions, as it is a tile editor which would help immensely for creating maps for my game. I did end up working with a tiled editor for this project, and it was very useful for getting the maps done on time. Lastly, as I have RPG Maker XP, for free since it went on sale at some point, I have easy access to a tool for creating RPGs, which can give me an easy checklist for what would be required to make my game function, of course not including the unique mechanics. That was useful when the game was still a turn-based RPG, but after the pivot it really didn't mean much. In terms of threats, the biggest threat to this project is unfortunately myself. This being a solo project, I do have fears that it may be too big for me to actually complete, even if I halved or even quartered the content. On top of that, while I did use the tutorial for the prototype, I will now need to recode everything on my own, which could potentially cause some issues in the future. I misspelled rebuilt. Planning may also be a threat, as I've never planned anything as large scale as this before. The planning large scale threat ended up coming to fruition and the project collapsed, but I put it back together. And that's it. See ya.